Today I'm going to show you how to smoothen the skin of an image in Photoshop using the frequency separation technique. Hi there, welcome to this training. My name is Emax from Pure Dreams Works. On today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to get flawless skin tone in Photoshop using the frequency separation technique. Do well to stay to the end of the video because I'll be giving you a bonus tip how to use the dodge and burn in Photoshop. So let's get right into it. For this training, we'll be using this image. To start off with frequency separation, you duplicate the background image into two new layers. So you hit the Command J on your keyboard and hit it again to have two new layers created. So you select the first layer and rename it to smooth. I'll select the second layer and rename it to texture. So let's hide the texture layer for now and select the smooth layer. You go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'll set the radius to 2.0 and hit OK. So we'll reveal the texture layer, select the texture layer, go to your blending mode option and change the blend mode to linear light and go to image, apply image, and you change the layer to the smooth layer. Select the smooth layer and leave the channel as RGB, and for the blend mode you change it to subtract. Make sure your offset is set to either 120 or 125, but for the purpose of this training I'll leave it at 125. So you hit OK. So the next step, you select the smooth layer and go to your mixer brush tool. If you can't find your mixer brush tool, right click on this brush tool area and you find the mixer brush tool somewhere around here. So this is it, and it's already selected on my tools panel. So one more thing, before you start brushing over the skin, make sure this particular option is selected. Clean the brush after each stroke. Make sure this option is selected and make sure your wet slider is set to somewhere around 30-35. It actually depends on what works for your image, but for this image I'll set it at 36 and the load I'll set it at 35. Okay, so let's brush over our skin. While you're brushing over our skin, make sure you preserve the highlights and the shadows in the image so you don't have your image looking flat at the end of the day. So let's gently brush over our skin. So while you're brushing, you notice the skin is looking smooth, and at the same time the texture is preserved, and that's as a result of this texture layer. So if you hide this texture layer, you notice that the image is looking all blurry. So the function of this texture layer is to preserve the texture of the image. So let's reveal the layer and continue brushing. So like I said, while you're brushing, make sure you preserve the highlights and the shadows in the image. We don't want the image to start looking flat at the end of the day. So we brush over her chin area. So sometimes I just like to brush over the lips, right? It's not necessary, but I just like to brush over the lips. So let's see what our image is looking like after using the mixer brush tool. So this is before and this is after. Before and after. So for the next step, I'll select the two layers and group them. So you hit Command G on your keyboard to group the two layers, and I'll hold Command Shift R. So I'll hold Command Shift Option E to to merge all the layers. So this is basically how you do your frequency separation, but we're not going to end it here. We'll just add a few more steps to enhance the image a bit further. So let's zoom in, and for this I would select the spot healing brush tool and just take out these highlights on her lips, and also take out these ones on her nose. So for the final step, we'll do dodge and burn to enhance the highlights and the shadows of the image. So to achieve that, you come to your adjustment layer icon, you select the curve adjustment layers and you rename it to dodge. Then you create another adjustment layer, same curves adjustment layer, and you rename it to burn. So you select the dodge adjustment layer and you increase the exposure. I think I'm good with this. So after increasing the exposure, you hit Command I on your keyboard to invert the layer mask, and let's zoom in. So for this step, we would select the brush tool and slightly brush over the highlight areas. Before you start brushing, make sure your foreground color is set to white and your opacity is reduced to somewhere around 20, 15, 10, but for the purpose of this training I will leave it at 20, and I'll slightly brush over the highlights areas. Make sure you don't brush over the shadow areas, just the highlight areas. That's the purpose of the brush. So we'll come over here. So you move down to the neck area and just brush over it. Just the highlight areas, remember, just the highlight areas, avoid the shadow areas. So this is what it's looking like. This is before and this is after. If you notice the effect is too much, you come to your opacity and reduce it. So in this case, we reduce it to somewhere around 80, and there you have it. I love what it's looking like. So let's select the burn layer and drag the slider downwards somewhere around here and invert the layer mask like we did to the dodge. So you hit your Command I on your keyboard and invert the layer mask. So you select the brush tool and make sure your opacity is set to 20 as usual, or maybe 15. So I'll just set it to somewhere around 15. And we brush over the shadow areas. So while you're brushing over the shadow areas, make sure you avoid the highlight areas. You don't want to brush over the highlight areas. So you slightly brush over the shadow areas. For this particular image, we're not going to do much with burn because the shadow areas are already looking good, but for the purpose of this training, I will just slightly brush over them to further enhance the shadows. So you notice it's just a subtle effect. You won't notice it until I'm done. So while I'm brushing, you won't notice the effect because it's very subtle. And there you have it. So I noticed this part close to our lips is kind of bright. So I'll just increase the opacity and just brush over it to darken it a bit. So I'll increase it a bit further and just slightly brush over it to darken it. So yeah, it's looking good. And this is before and after. So like I said, the effect is subtle, you won't see it while I'm brushing over it, but at the end of the day you see the overall results. So this is it. So I like to group my layers for every step I take. So for the dodge and burn, I will select the 2 layers and hit Command G on my keyboard to group them, and I will rename them dodge and burn. Then I'll rename this layer also frequency separation. So before the final step, I will just add a color grading layer. So I'll go to the create adjustment layer icon, select the levels adjustment layer. So I'll choose the reds, come over here and drag the slider to somewhere around 3 or 4. So but I'll just leave it at 3, and I'll select the blues and drag the slider to somewhere around maybe 3 also. I'll just leave it at 4. So this is before and after. So for the final step, I'm going to merge all the layers and sharpen the overall image. So to achieve that, I will hit Command Shift Option E on my keyboard to merge all layers, and I'll go over to the blend mode option and change the blend mode to linear light, and come over to filter, order, high pass, and you change the radius to somewhere around 1. So there's no particular number. You can impute any number depending on the quality of your image. So I would say 0.8. So this is good. If you think it's looking too sharp, you can further reduce it by reducing the opacity. So for this, I would reduce the opacity to somewhere around 80. Yeah, so 80 looks good. So this is our final result. So let's see before and after, before and after, before and after. So there you have it. This is how you do frequency separation from start to finish. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications to keep receiving amazing tutorials from us. So I'll see you in the next training.